So how do we make sure students make progress over a series of lessons?
Right. Well, I mean, I remember one of my teachers who did this particularly well. Her name was Priscilla, and she was teaching me Cantonese a few years back, and she was particularly good at this. And I always remember her as an example. And so we would have fairly regular lessons on Zoom, and a lot of it would be based on conversation. But one of the things that she would always do is whenever she taught me a new word, she would always write it down in this, I think she used a spreadsheet or something, a Google sheet, or doesn't really matter what it was. But we'd always end the lesson with 15, 20 new words or phrases that she had helped, either taught me or helped me say better during the lesson. And then what we would, in the subsequent lesson, she would very carefully just bring up those words or phrases from before. So I might be saying something and then she'd inject this word, and it would have been a word that we'd learnt the previous week. And then in the third lesson, she would keep dragging up these things that we'd learnt from early lessons. And it went on and on like that. And after months of learning, she would still be always bringing back all these words and phrases and bits of grammar that I had learned. And it was super effective because it meant that I would get to learn those words naturally because they were coming back over and over.
And you
and
need
over
that
again.
exposure, don't you? Several times before it really starts to
Exposure,
stick.
repetition. You know, people say that you need to hear a word 7 times or whatever before it actually sticks in the memory.
Yeah.
And so you can do that she did that so well for me, and it helped me learn loads of Cantonese because it just kept coming up over and over.
So that idea of moving forward, you need to look back and you need to make connections to what's been learned. You can't just kind of teach things discreetly and never return to something previous.
Yeah, so I think for trainee teachers, there's many ways to make sure that students progress, but actually keeping a record of things that you've actually taught, whether that be in a notebook that you have or on a shared doc that both people can see, is really key.
What about kind of planning ahead and planning a kind of series of lessons?
Yeah, because I think it's quite common that trainees want to, let's say you have a new student and they say, right, I want to sign up for 20 lessons with you. Yeah. Then immediately the new teacher will think, okay, well, how do I plan these 20 lessons so that they're learning lots? And what happens inevitably is that you can have an idea of where you're headed, the things that you want to teach, but in almost every case, what happens is as you go through the lessons, you realize that actually they want something a bit different, or else you become aware of certain struggles, and so you inevitably need to adapt. So generally, I say when you're teaching one-to-one, one of the great opportunities of teaching one-to-one is that you can adapt to the needs of the student. It's not like teaching a group of 20.
You can't adapt. If you've got 20 students, you
can't
appeal to everyone. Yeah, it wouldn't be fair if you adapted to one student.
Absolutely. So you have to plan ahead. But one of the great things about one-to-one is it's super flexible. So generally, I mean, the way that I always do this is I start with this very important document, the needs analysis. So you say to the student, what do you want to learn? What are your goals? And then maybe you give them you might ask them to do a little language test so you know what their strengths and weaknesses are. So before you even begin your course or your series of lessons, you know what they want to learn, what their weaknesses are. And then you can simply plan out, okay, well, over the next 10 lessons, here are the things we're going to cover. We're going to look at a couple of pieces of grammar, some vocabulary around a certain topic that they might want. And you can have that little map of where you're headed so that you can use it if you need it, but then you also have the space to adapt.
Be prepared to adapt. Yeah. What about outside the lesson? Anything else we can do?
So again, if making progress, if you want to ensure that students are making progress, it's really important to realize that a lot of the learning that happens when you're learning a new language happens outside the class. Yeah. And anyone who's had experience learning a foreign language knows that, when you're in the room with a teacher, there's a fair amount of pressure actually going on. You're trying to get the right answer and respond to questions. But actually, when you make progress is when you are reading a book on the train or studying in the evening. And so as a teacher, one of the things you can do is always make sure that you are setting outside work for the students. So you finish a lesson and you say, right, now we've got a week till the next lesson, so go and read this short story or go and do these exercises. That way you make sure the students got plenty of scope for continuing to make progress
And
outside.
then you can follow up on that in the next lesson as well. and that's going to encourage them to do it because they know you're going to talk about
And
it.
it makes lesson planning so easy, because if you, let's say that you set an activity at the end of a lesson, go and read this short story in your own time. Well, guess what? In the next lesson, what do you talk about? Well, you talk about the short story. You have that as your foundation, and you can very easily kind of fill a whole lesson talking about that, talking about some of the questions they might have, some vocabulary they don't know. And it feels, sometimes it can kind of feel like you're making it up on the fly, but actually you're doing the best possible thing, which is allowing the student to go and use the language, and then whatever comes up, and you deal with it, and that makes it so that you're helping them.